It's a sobering thought, is it not, that the armed police we see patrolling our streets and inserting their unwanted intrusions into our everyday lives, irrespective of whether or not we have committed crimes, have no more lawful authority than the security guards we might see in any commercial establishment, such as a shopping mall or sporting or entertainment centre. This is the nature of the deception that has been foisted upon us for centuries, certainly for the entire lifetimes of anyone now living. If we are ever to escape this false domination, many more people have to awaken to the true state of affairs. We can do this by reading publications which contain the truth of how this trickery has been played. One such is The Theft by Deception of the Great British Constitution. A link is available in the comments box. It should be read by every adult and reasonably intelligent adolescent. Everyone should download and print out a copy and become thoroughly familiar with it. Another, which contains a wealth of information which warrants absorption, is Democracy Defined, the Manifesto, by Kenn. However, there are signs that this awakening is happening and at an increasing rate. A major reason is the increasingly arrogant and unlawful actions of these corporations masquerading as governments over the past 3 years. The blatant trashing of individual rights during the COVID scare started the ball rolling. Following was the utterly illegal coercion of millions of people into accepting experimental treatments for the alleged threat, ultimately resulting in a totally unprecedented spike in the number of injuries and deaths from all causes, which no allegedly official body anywhere wishes to openly discuss. These have combined to cause an unprecedented reduction in the level of trust normally afforded such office bearers. The mistrust extends to the mainstream media, which for hundreds of years has stood as a bulwark against government overreach, but which now are all too easily perceived as the pampered menials of a handful of billionaires seeking to dominate those few who they superciliously deem worthy of survival in their new world order. Those who speak out against the machinations of these psychopaths are automatically ridiculed as conspiracy theorists by the aforesaid media. But a few moments' reflection reveals the flaw in this tactic and alerts thinkers. Even those with virtually no knowledge of history have heard of people such as the Egyptian pharaohs, the Roman emperors, plus Genghis Khan, Napoleon, Stalin, Hitler, Mao and others. There have always been those who seek to rule the world. If anything, the closer we come to the present day, the more frequently they seem to appear. Even those who may never have heard of these despots would have encountered in their lives others who seek to control or manipulate those around them, whether it be at home, in school, at work, or in any social setting which permits the operation of politics. There is a certain relatively small percentage of the population who aren't content to live peacefully, but who are driven to exercise some form of dominion over those who can't or won't resist them. Only someone completely oblivious to the everyday interactions between human beings would be unaware of these constant simmering reactions amongst people whose motives and moralities don't always align. It's as certain as any of the physical laws under which we live that there are people today who are actively seeking to attain world domination. They're just playing in a higher league than that prat in your family or at work who is always making life more awkward for you than you would like. The important question is, into which of the groups in these people's worldview do we fit? Sociopaths like these see others as one of three types: allies, rivals, or victims. Rivals and victims are eventually disposed of or discarded, either after their usefulness is exhausted, as with victims, or whenever their continued presence as a rival presents an existential threat to the sociopath's life or interests. Allies are a slightly more difficult issue for the despots. They are useful initially because hardly anybody starts from a position where their power ambitions are easily realised without opposition or hindrance. But eventually they metamorphise into the rival or potential rival category. Prudence dictates, if we don't see ourselves as a potential member of a cartel exercising global domination, an immediate reassignment of ourselves as a victim of those currently seeking this dominance, and to consider what actions we can take to escape the intended enslavement. Failure to face this will ultimately lead to a deluge of personal guilt for those honest enough to acknowledge their own cowardice. Ultimately, this battle will only be won if enough people decide that they really want their freedom and are prepared to risk whatever it takes to regain it. A form of personal infringement which we can easily anticipate is the introduction of the 15-minute city program, of which hopefully most are aware. This is an issue addressed by William Keat and Justin Walker in their letter to the Duke of Norfolk concerning the impending coronation of the next monarch, whoever that might be. There is nothing in the Constitution which says it must be the firstborn child of the previous monarch, or that it should be any form of hereditary privilege. At least 6 monarchs, not including Elizabeth II, have been removed from the English throne for failing to protect the rights of the subjects. They are listed in the article on the theft of the British Constitution, already referenced. Another looming threat is that of the central bank's digital currency. This would see a devastating loss of sovereignty to the entire nation, indeed to each individual. If the currency is entirely digital, it means that one's access to it can be turned off by a bank official acting under the directive of a bureaucrat or fake public official for any number of alleged crimes, such as publicly disagreeing with a political mandate, however illegal or unlawful it may be, or any government policy. Another horror could be that the currency in one's account may be given a shelf life, like the unused capacity on mobile phone recharge cards, which is wiped when the time for renewal is due. Having to endure a situation where one's bank account was reset to 0 every month would make it impossible to compile any surplus or savings. George Orwell's 1984 would have fully arrived. These are only 2 extreme threats to our personal liberties, and it would be naive to delude ourselves that, sensing the growing opposition to this accelerating abuse of power by governments, those running the scams won't try to introduce such moral monstrosities before the freedom movement can get organised and awaken people to action. Already we see the beginnings of the collapse of the world's fraudulent banking system. Probably only a few days or weeks' serious shortages of money or other essentials would have people who have never done any serious thinking begging the government to step in and save them, even if it means the enslavement of digital currency. After all, it only takes the random slaughter of a few crazed gunman victims, minute by comparison with the number of government-sanctioned killings in wars for profit, to have people who actually need the protection of personal arms against tyrants begging the government to disarm everyone. No one can change the minds of everyone else on any particular topic, but we can take steps to protect our own and our families' freedoms and rights. Ultimately, we want the world to be free, but if enough others won't join us in that endeavour, it's still morally justifiable and correct to conduct our own stand. We do not have to live on our knees when we have the choice of dying on our feet, as did those who fought without guarantee of success for the freedoms which they bequeathed us. Contrary to the protestations of pragmatists, there are things which are more important than our own individual lives, as any worthwhile parent will attest. But that is talk for another day. What can we do in this day to forestall these evil plans to enslave us? Regarding 15-minute cities, we can and must forward the Duke of Norfolk letter to our MPs, our families, friends, and especially our local council CEOs and officers. They must be informed strenuously that they are behaving treasonously to even contemplate such plans, and that there will be concerted efforts to ensure that such untrustworthy types will never again be elected to their positions. There must be a wall of noise assailing the ears of these miscreants, such that they realise that even should they succeed in erecting their prisons, there will be mass non-compliance. A funding strike, as in refusal to pay rates and other charges, should also be effective, because they have no lawful means to enforce compliance, irrespective of numbers. Concerning the digital currency, there's an old saying in the pugilist's world: if he wants to box, I fight. If he wants to fight, I box. Deprivation of a viable currency has happened numerous times, even in the last century. The most famous was when the German mark collapsed under runaway inflation in 1923. Some will have seen photos of people pushing wheelbarrows of banknotes designated in billions down the street to exchange for a loaf of bread. That occurred because the currency was so debauched by legalised counterfeiting that the relative values of the bread and the paper in the real world, where things are valued according to their usefulness, were at last roughly equal. In fact, the paper would have been more valuable had it not been defaced by meaningless symbols, and the loaf could probably have been bought for less than a wheelbarrow load. The artificial value, which existed only in the minds of those willing to trust the government, had finally evaporated. The deception was laid as bare as the innards at an autopsy. There can be no viable civil society without trust, something our scamsters and their sycophants forget. During the war, many Greeks resorted to British gold sovereigns, a single one of which could support a family for a week. In the 1970s, that was still the case, as it is basically today. Quarter-ounce gold bullion coins, virtually equivalent to a sovereign in weight, are available from the Perth Mint for $948 as we speak. 1 ounce silver coins, much more useful for the purchase of groceries, currently cost in the low to mid-40s from Swan Bullion in WA. This is one method that will explode into use if the digital currency is introduced here. Once vendors realise that they can also be turned off financially for an imagined as yet unproven infraction of some unlawful mandate, some of them will accept real money as a safeguard. Digital currency will be like a bucket of cold water in the faces of many sleepers. Remember, if they want to fight, we must box. Always do what the opponent doesn't want us to do. Again, making noise is the recommended strategy. Talk ceaselessly about our rights, trial by jury and the Constitution, whether people want to listen or not. What people may think of us is less important than what will happen should we fail. Thank you for watching.